Bonjour. Hello again everyone, welcome back to the channel and thank you for tuning in once again. Now in today's video I actually had a little bit of a different idea from what I usually do. So I briefly mentioned in the last video at the end in my final thought for the day that I play Dungeons and Dragons. You can see a selection of books here behind me. And this got me thinking. So I know I briefly touched on this in the last video, but with this game being the part of my life that it is, I did want to kind of go into it in a bit more depth and give everyone a bit of a deeper understanding of exactly what I do when I play Dungeons and Dragons. And hopefully remove some of the nerdy stigma around it all, because it's not, and I want people to play it and I want people to have fun, because it is fun. Now you could be any old office pen-pushing desk jockey like me for the majority of the week. But I tell you this. Come Sunday evenings, me and my friends get together and I don't have to be a pen-pushing desk jockey that I don't like. No, I get to be the most powerful god in the world. And my players get to be a fireball-slinging mage, a sentient militaristic robot, and a grisly great axe-wielding orc. And it's a great way to unwind at the end of the week, I think you can imagine. And so without much further ado, I'm going to give you the 5 best tips that I can give for newbie DMs who are thinking of starting their new campaign. So, let's get right into it. First of all, create the idea of your world in your head and ask yourself, what is my world like? For example, is magic a common practice in your world? Or is it really rare? Or is it even outlawed? That can be a good way to add flavour to it. What are the types of races you encounter? Now in my campaign that I run, it's a very free-for-all kind of thing. We've had all kinds. We've had a Leonin, which is actually a kind of a half lion, half man dude. And in my eyes, it was fun. It was great. Like I enjoyed it, the players enjoyed it, but at the same time, it's quite a rare species. So ask yourself, how rare are these exotic types of species? Is it mainly just elves, dwarves, and men? Or do you encounter things like dragonborn, tieflings, or a turtle, for God's sake? Actually, I'll be completely honest, one of the player characters I would like to play next is a turtle monk, so I can just call myself Master Uwe, because I love those movies. Think about the society next. Is religion commonly practiced? Is it accepted amongst most civilized societies? And perhaps does this lead to some political misconduct, religious upset and imbalance? Ask yourself questions like, what kind of exotic creatures do they encounter? Are exotic creatures and monsters fairly rare as well? Or do you get powerful beings like dragons and beholders and mind flayers? Are they quite common? You might remember mind flayers from Stranger Things actually if you've seen that. That's just what they called them, they don't actually look like that. I'll pop a picture on the screen. There you go. All of these questions can really help narrow down the vast array of choices when you're creating your world, and it can really help your players create more engaging backstories. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it. As I say, in my first campaign, I'm running a very run-of-the-mill sort of fantasy realm where there's lots of crazy monsters, lots of the world is fairly untamed, and you get lots of different kinds of people. Not at all like Lord of the Rings. More like The Witcher. The rarer you make these monsters, the more interesting backstories could turn out to be, you never know. For example, one player could say that they barely survived an encounter with a fearsome aboleth when they were younger, while they were deep sea diving for pearls for their town. Just things like that adds a little bit of flavour to your world, and it might be something to consider. But again, this is not something you have to do, this is just thought 1. So take it on board maybe. It also leaves options open for the events of your world, the world-shaking events that will eventually shape the story of your campaign. For example, midway through, a world-shaking event like a massive wild arcane surge of magic could spawn thousands of fearsome creatures into existence that no one has ever seen before, terrifying the lay folk, and it could be very interesting for you. That being said, let's move on to point 2. Engaging properly with your players. The best way to do this is to make sure that before we start, your players have a thoroughly engaging backstory, because the more detailed, the better it is for you. When players give you detailed backstory, you can use that as incredibly volatile campaign fuel for the events and the quests that these players go on. Using characters that these players have created in their backstory in your own campaign can create a much deeper sense of engagement for that player when they see their own creations coming to life through role-playing, and it's very, very fun. Once again, I'm going to refer to my world. One of my players grew up with an old mage who kind of raised him as a father, right? This old mage, who I had no intention of including in my campaign because I didn't come up with him myself, I used him for my player's backstory, and now he is such an important figure. He kind of runs the whole major city in my world, you know what I mean? He's kind of the most important figurehead. Do your players' backstories contain mortal enemies that are still alive? Oh my god, that is a good thing. Use that. These can turn into very lore-rich and personalized quests for the party, especially for that player, and you will see their sense of engagement just flourishing as they see Olgar the Blood Fist or something from their backstory coming at them with an axe, and this is the moment they swear revenge on this guy. Let me give you an example. One of your players has chosen a half-orc barbarian trained in the ways of the axe and heir to the chief of their clan. However, a jealous uncle to this heir, and brother to the chief, poisons the chief's drink with an undetectable poison that leads to the conclusion that he died from a terrible turn of ill health. The people of the village are in mourning, and now the jealous uncle has set his sights on the heir, the only thing standing in his way from the seat of the chief and the chief's beautiful widowed wife. And this is the bit where maybe your players can fill out the backstory a bit more, because this is just an example. But perhaps your young half-orc barbarian outs the jealous uncle in some way, outing him as the murderer he is, forcing him to flee from the clan, but not before the jealous uncle swears a bloody revenge on the half-orc barbarian and escapes with his life. Now there's an enemy right there. Something that you can use in quests later down the line. Or even, if you want to get real spicy, you could say it was some kind of curse. Some kind of curse that hangs over the half-orc barbarian and affects the way their character is played. It's all down to your imagination at the end of the day. The more imagination, the better. But keep your players engaged is the main point. And use those juicy backstories. Use them as the foundation for some of your earlier quests, because it helps your players more than anything get a feel for how they want to play their character. So now what you've got, what your world is like overall, and you've got some of the early quests, let's move on to point 3. The main story. Now this is one that I struggled with when I started writing, but you know what? I didn't actually have a story in mind when I first started playing as a DM with these guys, and that is totally okay. Don't worry if you've not quite figured out the main plot for your campaign by session 1. This will come to you in time. As aforementioned, you can use one of your players' backstories to have maybe a cool opening quest for the players that is fun, few easy combats thrown in, appropriate for their level, and it keeps everyone engaged. And it lets everyone get a feel for whether or not they actually want to play this campaign with you or not. It's a good test for a new DM. This is where your experience is very, very important. This is where if you're playing with new players, you want to keep things simple. They don't need to know about all their fancy character abilities right off the bat, all the abilities their race has. All they need is a d20 and a brief description of how attack rolls and saving modifiers work. And then you're golden to play. And if they have questions, they can ask it themselves. And that's good because it shows they're interested. And you're doing a good job. Keep it up, boy, well done. Now, the thing I found most helpful in writing the main story and figuring it out as I went along was, boy howdy, cliffhangers. Use cliffhangers, they are so important. Well, maybe, you don't have to, but I found it really helpful when I was doing this, because it meant my players wanted to come back for more and more and more, and even the ones I didn't expect to enjoy the session actually left at the end going, do you know what, Rob, that was really fun, thanks for that. And I was like, get in! So, by using a cliffhanger, you have your players asking more questions, and their old questions may have been answered, yes, but they are asking more, and they want to know where the story leads. Perhaps they find a strange magic item that leads them to a different place in the world, where they meet new NPCs and where they meet new characters and people you've designed and the things you've thrown in, and it makes it a much more engaging story. So by the end of session 1, you're probably getting much more of a better feel for how your players think and the things they do and how their characters act. And once you let your players then decide what they want to do and where they want to go next, the main story and villain practically begin writing themselves. So don't even worry about it. They will make enemies along the way, and they will make some powerful enemies along the way, so you can use those in your story. There is a story in you, but it's not about regurgitating this story onto a sheet straight away and making the campaign, because that could lead to some really bad railroading, which will take us to the next point actually. Just carve the story out and let it become clearer to you as you chip away at these sort of more manageable stories in the form of quests, until it's clear to you, as well as your players, what the real threats are and who the real enemies are and the things to watch out for in the world, and what the real story is more than anything. As I mentioned before, this will take us on to the next point, railroading. Railroading is a trap that many young, bright-eyed DMs can fall into, and trust me, it will kill your players' interest in your campaign. Imagine this.
And as you approach the small settlement, it looks barren and deserted, save for the rats that scurry across the wet ground into the side alleys. The road ahead leads directly to an ominous-looking castle.
Alright, I'd like to knock on some doors and see if I can investigate to find out where all the residents are.
Cool, and as you do that, you find yourself inadvertently wandering up the road, up to the ominous-looking castle, where the drawbridge drops with a loud crash, as if expecting your arrival.
I mean, cool. Did I find anything?
No, and as you cross the drawbridge, you feel compelled to go straight across the courtyard and into the room opposite.
Okay, well, are there any other rooms that lead away from this courtyard? I'd like to maybe do some investigating first, see if I can find any evidence as to what happened in this village.
Yeah, sure. And as you make your way into the opposite room, you notice a strange wall contraption with runes inscribed all over the walls. This must be the way forward.
Ah, guys, this looks like a puzzle. We should probably check this out in a bit. I'd still like to check out those other rooms.
The door locks behind you.
I hit it with my axe to try and break it down. A 21.
It's magic. Your axe does nothing. Solve the puzzle.
Don't let your players think that they have no say in the events of your campaign. Let them make the decision, and then just roll with it. Go with the results of their dice rolls and their choices, and just form the story that way. They will write the story for you. If they feel like they're playing out a story rather than being a part of it, they're going to lose interest very fast. And it means you failed. Once again, I'm going to circle back to my campaign, guys. This is a little tip from Rob Halliday over here. In session 1 with my players, these were all new players, I'd like to point out. I'd already been playing D&D for 2 years before any of them joined, so I wanted it to be a nice, easy, sort of fun-going thing for them. I had this little quest planned out, but we didn't do any of that, anything that I planned quest-wise, whatsoever. And do you know why? It's because my party spent so much time dicking around and breaking the law and stealing from people and talking to NPCs that were completely meaningless and irrelevant to the actual quest they were on. And they spent a good 5 hours doing this, and as far as I'm concerned, we achieved nothing in relation to my story, but it didn't matter. And you know why? Because all of my players had fun. And I had fun, which is important as well. Because I just rolled with it. I just rolled with their characters' decisions, and I let the choices that they make a difference in my world, even though they were only in a very small village, stealing from blacksmiths, stabbing blacksmiths, trying to gamble with the blacksmith. Yeah, they spent a lot of time talking to that blacksmith. And I gave her a Cornish accent as well, which I started to struggle to do after 5 hours of doing a Cornish accent. Morning angle and all that, you know. So like I said before, all of my players were very new. They all admitted to me, even the players that I didn't think would enjoy it, actually came to me at the end and said, "You know what, Rob? That was really fun. Thanks for letting us play that. I can't wait to play again." Job done. Well done, you've done it, DM. New DM. Success. All I'm saying about point 4 is, it doesn't matter what you've prepped in that session. That just gives you a heads up for what you think your players are going to do. But ultimately, their decisions and choices will shape the events of that session, and it depends how long you want to play. You don't have to play for 5 hours. We don't anymore. We usually play for like 3 to 4. So if you feel your players getting sidetracked, it's okay to try and nudge them in the right direction once again for the things that you've prepped. But don't do it too far, okay? Which brings me on to my next point. Improv. Simply put. This is so crucial in a game where you cannot possibly predict what your players are going to do, and it doesn't matter how much you've prepared, you cannot predict the antics that your players will get up to, and it's very important to just roll with that. Be prepared to change the story slightly if things haven't quite gone according to your plan. Like I said before, you can throw in a few chance encounters, maybe a few little nudges here and there to get your players back on track, but do not force it. That is the ultimate point. Do not force it. If your players are so far off what you originally planned for that session that nudging them back in the right direction would basically turn into railroading them, don't do it. You can just leave that story behind, and believe me, that is something that will happen a lot. You might have quests that you prepared that you just never get to play out with your players, but that is okay. Maybe you can use it somewhere else. Just have a little back catalogue of quests that have never been used. I've got about a dozen of those. And the beauty of improv is you can throw in a few little curveballs for yourself to keep yourself interested in the game. Because, let me tell you this, if everything is going according to plan and it's going really well for you, that can actually get quite boring as a DM. Funnily enough. So you can just throw in these random little curveballs and chance encounters for yourself to keep yourself interested mostly, but also for your players. It kind of shakes things up a little bit, and it's good to use. Guess what time it is? Guess what time it is? It's time to cycle back to my example campaign again. So some of my players' favourite campaign events have been stuff that I've just made up on the fly. One time, when they were about to trek up this icy, frigid mountain, they heard a little rustle in the bushes nearby. With weapons drawn, they approached the bushes slowly, only to discover a scared and terribly malnourished little girl, orphaned by the Mind Flayer attacks that had just recently taken place on the continent. So they took her with them. Up the mountain. In the cold. But that didn't matter, because I could tell the moment they met that girl, all of their hearts just melted. As I was just saying things like, "Where's my mum and dad?" And shit like that. You could just see their hearts melting, dude. But once they'd finished that quest line, they left her in the care of a close and trusted friend. You know, and they'd left her little gifts like a little dagger and a satchel to carry her own adventuring gear in, because she said, I want to be just like you guys when I grow up, and things like that. And they were like, well, I'm sure you can, but we can't take you with us right now because we're on a very dangerous quest and we're not actually meant to be here. And so that was that. Or so they thought. A few sessions later in the subsequent weeks, they actually encountered her again, although they didn't recognise her. And do you know why? Because she was a grown woman now, and she was a skilled artificer, and she'd built her own rifle, and she was incredibly dexterous. The only way they recognised her is she went up to the player that gave her the dagger, and she said, I believe this is yours. And his jaw just fell to the ground, and I could see all their minds were blown, and that was a great little thing for me. And it ended up being one of my favourite characters, and pretty much one of the players' favourite characters as well. You can do stuff like this. You can take control. It's your world, remember that. Ultimately, improv can be used if you're getting bored of the current quest, because if you're getting bored as a DM, your players will get bored. That is kind of how things go. So try to spice things up as best you can. Use your imagination. Maybe throw these little curveballs in here and there. Maybe just a chance encounter as a combat. Maybe a chance encounter with a scared little girl who's malnourished and orphan. Things like that. Really help to create really interesting NPCs and really interesting encounters for your players. With that being said, they are the 5 most important tips that I wish I would have known earlier when I started DMing. But these are the things I've learned along the way, and I hope that if anyone's thinking of getting into Dungeons & Dragons, that you can use this video and it was some help to you. I would also thoroughly recommend starting off as a player. Definitely start off as a player first. And then if you get a feel for the game, you're kind of familiarizing yourself with the rules, then maybe you can think about DMing for people, and then it will be really fun. It's not an expensive hobby. Really. But once you get into it, then you start buying shit like this behind me. I have a few more down here. But yes, guys, thank you for indulging me and sharing my little passion with you. I hope it helped anyone who's thinking of getting into the game, and thank you all for watching so much. Love you loads. See you later, guys.